am Samuel Bordelleau. I'm a partner at Linklaters, a global law firm. I'm usually finding solutions for clients on complex energy and infrastructure projects around the globe. And today I will be facilitating this truly exceptional C-level discussion. So it's about infra sovereignty, and it will be about the geopolitical tensions that are mounting and the shifts of technology that are accelerating, the imperative to secure our sovereignty in energy, digital, and defense infrastructure moves at center stage. The hard truth is that we're forked in the road, and France and Europe continue with long-term competitiveness and independence for the coming decades will be determined by the choices that are made today. So without further ado, I'll introduce you my stellar speakers. We're Aurélien HAMELLE, on my left, who is the Président Stratégie et Développement Durable and ExCom member at TotalEnergies, who you might have heard about. So you present a market leader in energy, the only French major covering the full energy sector with a truly global reach. You bring to this table a transverse view on our world's transition to a resilient, decarbonated energy mix. On my left as well, we have Alain, who is co-founder, chairman and CEO of Antin Infrastructure Partners. You might have heard about them as well. So you are a pioneer, a leading thinker in our sector. You are a specialist in making the right infra decisions at the right time. And you are here with us today to bring just that, the best investor's view on how to see potential and deliver value. Right. So one of our themes this year is sovereignty. It now affects directly enterprise value, whether because of supply chain risk, omnipresence of state-controlled stakeholders in certain key industries, or regulatory risk. Aurélien, Alain, how has this reshaped your priorities, and where do you see the main opportunities and risks? Alain? You want to go first? No.
I can go first, it's okay. First, I think the evolution of and geopolitical tensions, it has reaffirmed and strengthened a rule of thumb we have at TotalEnergies, which is usually no more than 10% of our capital employed in any given country. And this diversification of where we invest proves to be very resilient in these very volatile times. And this is something to which we pay even more attention than before. One good example was when Russia invaded Ukraine. We had 10-point-something% of our capital employed in Russia. We impaired most of that. That was a big hit, but still something you can manage as a company when actually it's only 10% of who you are, basically. The other thing is that we pay more attention to what's the alignment of our investment with regional priorities, meaning in the US, it's going to be a lot about LNG and power. In Europe, it's going to be about decarbonized power. In Malaysia, it's going to be about oil exploration. And aligning your investment with sovereign regional thesis is very important. And one last point, I think the main risk is that one day, if tensions keep rising, we may have to choose sides, choose camps. If blocks become so tensed that you have to choose one over the other, which is obviously, I think, the main risk we face today.
Yeah, I would say that sovereignty is really has become at the heart of our, I would say, of our concerns and I would say policies. Because in fact, if we sit back, infrastructure is in a quite favorable position because you localize some premises, I mean some premises, typically country by country basis, some infrastructures, and you can take the simplistic view that once you've done that, everybody basically has got a control over its sovereignty. I think this vision, simplistic vision based on asset location, is passé in my thinking. And if you think about digital infrastructure, for instance, the point is not so much to have some data centers on board, but to basically control the data chain at large. And so the big geopolitical changes that we are experiencing for the last few years, and which in my view will continue to develop, pose the issue of sovereignty very much so. And actually, I see in the name of this Ministry of Finance and Economy the addition of industrial, energy, and digital sovereignty. I think it's spot on. It's a challenge not just for this country, but for the world at large.
Thank you both. I think we'll come back to all of these topics during this discussion. So energy demand is accelerating. I think we all know that. We've all heard about that, particularly from AI and data centers. In your view, Alain, why is it important? And what must France and Europe do to secure sovereign energy supply and keep pace with global players investing at scale?
Well, if we take a sort of a hawk-eye view on the digital data centers business, first of all, more than 70% of European data is processed in US-based data centers, just because, in fact, you have the clients and the operators happen to be American, I would say, a company. It obviously poses commercial, regulatory, reputational risk, but also judiciary risk, because we are in a world where access to data, and in particular to company data, can be granted by, can be demanded by some judges in different jurisdictions, and therefore it is extremely important to be sure that companies in whatever country they operate in can have the control over the data they have and not be obliged to tender some data, some confidential data in some jurisdictions. So the notion of sovereignty of data is way beyond saying the fact that you locate a new data center in, say, Europe as opposed to the US. It goes way beyond these things. And I think it is a theme which is not always very well understood, because Europe is de facto a political project which is based on very different, I would say, countries which have different, I would say, political agendas, and it is difficult to see emerge a policy when it comes to, I would say, data sovereignty or sovereignty over data treatment. Some people have no request for such things. Other countries are more vocal and request more. And the European Commission has got this, I would say, a difficult task of trying to define some common policy, which, as you can easily see, is frequently the object of some, I would say, dispute, particularly with the US administration.
Thank you. And I think to do all of that and to achieve your sovereignty through data, we'll probably need a lot of electricity. So Aurélien, I mean, you're deeply involved in achieving new energy, additionality of energy for your clients. In your view, which regulatory or collaborative levers would act as a catalyst, remove bottlenecks, and enable Europe and its business champions to move faster in accelerating the energy deployment and transitioning grid infrastructure? I think
the main ask we may have from policymakers and I would say companies in cross-sectoral approaches is setting the right priorities. Today, the European energy policy is mostly set around the aim to achieve net zero in 2050 and reducing 55% of our emissions by 2030, which is an aim which must remain in place. Having said that, I think it's going to be too expensive in a very dire fiscal environment and budget environment to achieve all of that, and I think everybody realizes that. So we need to set priorities, and one key priority is to give certainty in unlocking additional electricity demand. Because when you look at electricity markets today, there's not that much, just now, short-term, additional electricity demand. And we need more power demand to come from basically transportation, more EV cars on the streets, the industry, producing mid-range heat for industry, which today is produced by coal, gas, and oil, and data centers. And I think supporting everything that can unlock this additional demand will actually give a lot of comfort and security to further investments in additional power generation capacity. Nuclear, hydro is pretty at its peak already. Renewables, obviously, gas-fired power plants. And that's going to be key. Setting priorities mean having a sectoral approach where the EU policymakers have to work with the car industry. You know, today, a European car, which is a thermal engine car, built in Europe, has 90% European components in it. A a European electric car, battery electric vehicle, has 60% European components in it. Battery obviously plays a large role in here. And I think helping the whole value chain integrate is going to be key so that prices can come down in EVs because there's still an affordability concern for buyers, and so that there's more in it for European jobs, basically. So I think this is the kind of priority we need to set. And having said that, at the same time, Europe needs to have redundancy, spare capacity to protect its sovereignty and energy security. One example of that is having, for instance, capacity mechanisms in place for gas-fired power plants, because you need to make up for the intermittency of renewables, which are the most growing electricity source in Europe. If you want to deal with the intermittency and have backup and support, you need to have flexible assets, batteries, and gas-fired power plants. And because gas-fired power plants, for instance, in which we are involved, will be less utilized over time, if you want them to stay and be here when you need them, you need to have stronger capacity markets. I think these are the kinds of priorities we can set from a policy perspective that will help unlock some of the investment and demand.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've already touched on digital and the need for AI and the additional capacity in terms of data center, the sovereignty issues and challenges this poses. I mean, Alain, from your perspective and your firm's perspective, how do you see that in terms of trend for investment in the coming years?
Well, I think the trends are going to be immense, the needs are going to be immense, and it actually comes down to what Aurélien mentioned about electrification. If you look at what is happening today in the US market, in the data center business, in fact, most of the investments carried out by people who develop data centers is about putting in place some energy supply network. And it's massive. It's not like 10% more, it's like the bulk. When you develop a big data center for, say, Amazon or whoever else, the bulk of the cost is electrification. That is the name of it. And the two topics, data centers, digital, and energy, are completely entwined, completely imbricated between one each other. And they go together. I would like just to quote an example of a city, I constantly forget the name of it, in Virginia, in the States. It's a small city, and they have notorious for having about 100 data centers in the city. You can imagine that the local utility is incapable of dealing with this surge of electricity needed. So it means that, the electricity has to be produced independently. So the challenge of data centers expansion in Europe is going to be more or less comparable to the ones that we are currently seeing in the US. And the only answer I can see is, I would say, a mix of energy supplies. Clearly, nuclear is certainly going to be, in the long term, an important source of electricity, so to speak, but it will take a lot of time. And even in countries which have a big nuclear, I would say, program like France, the new reactors which have been mentioned by the minister earlier will take decades, maybe a couple of decades to surface and be in operation. So it gives you an idea. Microsoft recently bought the site of 3 Mile Island in the States, again with a view of creating revamping some civilian nuclear programs to meet with energy needs. But again, it will take a lot of time, maybe 1 or 2 decades, to be a significant producer of electricity. Meanwhile, you need to do with what you have. It can be gas, it can be renewable, but you need to do with what you have. And the quicker way to deploy is going to be renewables, especially solar. Then you will have, if you can have some pipelines or infrastructure in place, gas also is going to be an option, but you will have to do with whatever you want. So in fact, when you think digital, you have to, in infrastructure, you have to think electricity.
Thank you, Alain. We mentioned gas. We have Total on the stage. So, Aurélien, I mean, what, in your view, should be your role, or your company's role in all of that?
Well, I think it's both, from a client and a supplier perspective, I would say. From a supplier perspective, and this goes to Alain's point, we need to provide solutions that will not deprive the grid and the, let's say, traditional B2B or B2C consumers of stable electricity prices, because that's the concern in Virginia, namely, actually. People are really concerned about prices going up because of so many data centers. So we need to be able to provide these solutions that are going to be embedded into the projects, and this is what we're going to do with, providing batteries, for instance, as storage. Something we've done in Sweden with Microsoft, for instance. They've installed batteries that our affiliate Saft produces as a backup instead of having diesel generators. So you need to be able to provide these solutions where there is reliable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week electricity. This is really renewables. There's baseload with nuclear in some countries like France, obviously. You have to have flexibility, again, batteries and gas-fired power plants. And if you have that blend of a generation mix, you can offer cleaner electricity that's reliable and that's firm, again, 7 days a week and 24 hours a day. Now, from the client perspective, because we are a big user of data and AI solutions now, we need to be careful where we put our eggs. We have some very, very confidential, sensitive data around wind modeling, for instance, or geological formation of oil and gas reservoirs. We put that in data centers, on premises. It's not in the cloud. We use US Cloud, obviously. They're the biggest provider. They have great services, so they have an edge, obviously. We use them. We know what we put in there. And then we have discussions with them. Microsoft is very at the forefront of that in terms of what they can do here in Europe in building these so-called sovereign clouds where these clouds can be operated by European companies. And then finally, we have partnerships like one we announced a couple of months ago with Mistral AI, where we're going to be devising energy-tailored AI solutions with Mistral around reducing the emissions, the methane footprint, modeling of power markets. So we can be, I would say, an enabler as a big energy company in scaling up some of the capabilities we have in Europe with some of the European companies that provide these either data services or AI solutions.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so I think we'll skip straight to the conclusion. I would like each of you to give homework to the decision makers and the leaders in this room. If you were to make one wish for Christmas this year, what would it be? Aurélien?
Pick some fights. Choose priorities. I don't think we can afford, from a budget perspective, to do everything all at once. And I think selecting priorities where we're going to be supporting sectors is going to be key if Europe wants to achieve lowering the emissions, maintaining growth and competitiveness, and having some large sovereign players in Europe that can be counted for.
Pick your fights. Okay, Alain?
For me, my recommendation would be to select very prudently priorities which are attainable. In other words, not follow some agendas which are completely unrealistic, but just be realistic about what can be achieved and stick to it.
Okay. Right. So sovereignty, I think it was quite an interesting and stimulating discussion. Thank you both for that. Sovereignty is not only a political slogan, it will also be a catalyst for investment and in the key infrastructure sectors. France is, I think we can all say and acknowledge that France's and Europe's continuing resilience across energy, digital, and all the other sectors demands acknowledging this fact. As we said before, we are really at the fork in the road. The right decisions need to be made. A bold leadership to deploy capital in the right places at the right time needs to be done now. Thank you all.